Dante Corsero's fist closed on the man's collar and drove his face down into the edge of the desk. Glass went across the floor. The man made a sound that wasn't a word. Dante didn't let go. He leaned in close enough to be heard over the choking and asked him one more time who had opened the container. Then the study door swung wide. A 5-year-old stood in it, red lace dress, black ribbon in her curls, a tin of crayons held flat against her chest with both hands. She looked at the blood, then at Dante and said in a perfectly ordinary voice, "You're doing it wrong. You have to say sorry first." Nobody in that room breathed. Duh. Before we go on, if stories about the people who change us when we're not looking are your kind of story, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because what happens in the last 20 minutes is not what you're expecting. And tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I want to see how far this one travels. 6 days earlier, at 4 in the morning, someone knocked on the servant's door of the Corsero estate. Margot Renard had been awake anyway. She had been awake most nights for 8 years, and she had learned the sounds of that house the way other women learned the faces of their own children. The knock was wrong. It was too soft to be the deliveryman and too early to be anyone else, and it came 3 times and then stopped the way a person knocks when they have already decided nobody is coming. She went down in her robe with her hair still pinned and opened the door. Her sister stood there with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a child asleep on the other hip. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Margot had not seen Cecily in 4 years. In that time, her sister had gotten thinner in the wrong way, the way people get thin when eating has become one more thing they do not have the energy for. There was a mark along her jaw that had gone from purple to the color of old paper. She was holding the child like she had been holding her for a long distance. "Get in," Margot said, "before someone sees you standing there." She took them up the back stairs to her own room above the kitchen because she could not think of anywhere else at that hour, and she poured her sister a glass of water and did not ask a single question. She had learned a long time ago that the fastest way to make Cecily stop talking was to ask her a question. So she sat on the edge of the bed and waited, and eventually it came out in pieces the way it always did. Wade had lost the job at the freight terminal. That had been the first thing. Then he had started drinking again, which Cecily said in the flat voice of a woman reporting weather. Then the card rooms behind the barbershop on Rampart, and after those, the ones with worse company. Then the money in the flour tin had gone missing. Then the money she had hidden in the lining of the diaper bag had gone missing, which meant he had gone looking, which meant he had known she was hiding it, which meant something had changed in him that could not change back. Then 4 nights ago, 3 men had been standing in her kitchen at 10 at night explaining to Wade in very polite voices exactly how much time he had left. Cecily stopped there. Margot waited. "The short one," Cecily said. "The one with the hand." He turned his head. Josie was asleep down the hall, and he turned his head toward the sound of her breathing. She was looking at the floor. "He looked at my daughter the way you look at money somebody owes you." She had packed in the dark. She had lifted Josie out of bed, still warm and still dreaming, and walked out of that apartment before the sun came up, and she had gotten on 2 buses and walked the last mile, and she had arrived at the only address she had left in the world. Margot listened to all of it and felt exactly 2 things. The first was what a sister is supposed to feel, and she felt it honestly and it hurt. The second thing she did not look at directly. She said she would speak to Mr. Corsaro in the morning. She did speak to him. She caught him in the hallway outside his study at 9 and told him her sister needed honest work, that the woman was quiet and would give no trouble, and that there was a child. She said the last part quickly, the way you put a small stone in a large bag and hope it is not weighed separately. Dante did not look up from what he was reading. He said whatever she thought was best and to keep them out of his way, and that was the whole of it. He had forgotten the conversation before she reached the end of the corridor. That was how it worked in that house. Margot ran everything below the ceiling of his attention, and he never once looked down at it, and for 8 years she had told herself that this was a kind of trust. She moved Cecily and Josie into a room at the back of the servants' wing that same evening. She gave her sister 3 gray uniforms and a pair of soft-soled shoes and showed her the linen cupboards and the laundry schedule in the back stairs. She was in every way anyone could have observed exactly the older sister she had always been. Then she stood in the doorway with the lamp turned low and gave one instruction. "Keep her away from Mr. Corsaro." Her voice was gentle. Her voice was always gentle. I mean it, Cecily. He does not want children in this house. He has his reasons, and they're not yours to know. If she bothers him even once, all three of us are on the street by morning. Cecily nodded. She would have nodded to anything that night. Margot went back to her own room and lay down and did not sleep, and did not permit herself to examine the second reason, which was that she had spent 8 years building something very small and very private inside that house, and she did not want anyone walking into it. The reasons Margot would not explain were 5 years old and locked behind a door at the end of the West Wing. Dante Corsaro was 38. He ran the Corsaro family out of New Orleans and had since he was 31, and the river wharves and the bonded warehouses on the East Bank moved. What he said, they moved and nothing else. Men who had known his father were careful with his name. Men who had not known his father were more careful. He had not always been made of that. There had been a woman named Elena who could laugh at his silences until they cracked, who played the piano badly and knew she played it badly and played it anyway. There had been a daughter named Mira, 5 years old, who hid his cufflinks in the pockets of his coats and denied it to his face with her hands behind her back. He had believed for a while that he could keep 2 lives in the same body, one of them out on the water where his name meant what it meant, and one behind his own walls where he was nothing but a man who tied a ribbon around a small wrist on Sunday mornings. Then on an ordinary Tuesday, a car carrying his wife and his daughter left the causeway in fog. There were no witnesses. There were no skid marks that told a clean story. The police called it an accident and closed it in 11 days. Dante, who knew every enemy he had by name, called it something else and could not prove one word of it. That was the wound that did not close, not the loss. Men survive loss. It was the not knowing sitting underneath the loss, the question that came back every single night at the same hour. If they had not belonged to me, would they still be alive? He never found the answer, so he built a room out of the question and moved into it. Within a month of the funerals, he locked Mira's bedroom door and gave the key to nobody. He had the photographs taken down. He gave an order that their names were not to be spoken in the house, and the order was so completely obeyed that after a year, people had stopped needing to be reminded. He stopped going to Mass. He stopped sleeping in the bed. And he made himself a rule and repeated it the way other men repeat prayers. To love something is to hand your enemies a weapon shaped exactly like it. He would not love again. He would not have a child near him. He would not give the world one more soft place to aim at. For 5 years, nothing living had wandered into that house by accident. Josie Renard was 5, and 5 is an age that does not accept locked doors as an answer. By the second afternoon, she had found the koi pond, the kitchen cat, and a place behind the garden wall where the gravel was warm. By the third, she had established that the cook could be persuaded that the gardener could not, and that the man who stood at the front gate all day had a face like a wall, but would look at her drawings if she held them up high enough and waited long enough. Cecily watched her do all of it with her heart in her throat. She had spent 4 years teaching that child to be quiet. She had done it the way frightened mothers do it, without ever once saying, "Why not now? Baby, not so loud. Come here. Sit with me." And it had not taken not even a little. Josie had come out of that apartment the same way she went into every room, chin up, both hands full, entirely certain that the world was interested in what she had to say. Sometimes watching her, Cecily could not decide whether she had failed or whether it was the only thing she had ever gotten right. Josie carried her crayon tin everywhere. It had a dent in the lid from a fall and a hinge that had to be persuaded. And inside it, the reds were worn down to stubs because red was the only color she considered serious. She drew houses, always houses, houses with too many windows and a door in the middle and smoke coming out of the chimney in a fat spiral and out front in a row. 3 people holding hands whose sizes never changed, no matter how many times she was told about perspective. She had drawn that house in 6 apartments. She was drawing it now in the servants' wing, and in that enormous silent building, every closed door she passed looked to her exactly like a question that nobody had bothered to answer yet. It happened on the 4th afternoon. Cecily had been sent to the laundry annex to help fold table linen for a dinner, and she had brought Josie with her because there was nowhere else to put her. She sat the girl on a stool in the corner with her crayon tin and a stack of paper and told her in the voice mothers use when they mean it all the way down to stay right there until Mama came back. Josie nodded very solemnly. She meant it too for about 15 minutes. Then a crayon rolled off the stool and went under the folding table, and Josie went after it. And when she came up on the other side, she was closer to the open door than she had been. And through the open door, something small and yellow was going past in the air. And Josie Renard had never in her short life let a butterfly go past unaccompanied. The butterfly was gone inside a minute. Josie was not. She stopped somewhere with a long red carpet that ate the sound of her shoes, and every door she could see was tall and shut, and had a handle set above the height of her head, and they were all the same door, and none of them were any door she had ever seen. She was not frightened. Not for a while. She stood in the middle of that carpet and held the crayon tin flat against her chest with both hands and considered the situation, and her lower lip began to do the thing it did before it did the other thing. Then she saw the light. At the far end, one of the tall doors was not quite closed, and a strip of warm yellow lay across the carpet like something had been laid down for her to walk on. Josie walked toward it. She put one hand flat on the wood and pushed. There were 4 men in the Corsaro organization who were permitted to enter that room without being sent for, and all 4 of them knocked twice and waited. Dante was at the desk signing bills of lading. He had been at it since 7, and he was in the part of the day where his own handwriting had started to look like somebody else's. He heard the smallest possible sound, small shoes on the strip of wood where the carpet ended. He looked up. A child was standing just inside his door. Loom curls, a black ribbon, a red lace dress with a stitched hem, a tin of crayons pressed flat against her chest, and 2 very round eyes looking directly at him without one single ounce of fear in them. Dante did not breathe. It was not that she looked like Mira. She did not look like Mira at all. The face was wrong, the mouth was wrong. The way she stood with her chest pushed out belonged to a child he had never met. It was the age. 5 years old is a specific shape in the world. It is a specific height off the floor. It is a specific way of holding something with both hands, because one hand is not yet enough. 5 years old had been erased out of that house with a locked door and a set of instructions, and it was standing on his rug. His body remembered the shape before his mind could stop it. The first thing he did, and he did it fast, the way you pull your hand off a stove, was reach for the small brass bell at the corner of the desk. He would ring it. Someone would come running. The child would be lifted and apologized for and removed. The door would close. The room would go back to being what it had been for 5 years. His hand did not reach the bell, because the child tilted her head to one side the way small birds do and asked him something. "Do you eat dinner by yourself?" Dante's hand stopped in the air. He had been asked a great many questions in his life. Men had asked him for their lives. Politicians had asked him for favors and then asked him to forget they had asked. A priest had once asked him very carefully whether he had considered what he was doing to his soul. Nobody had ever asked him that one. He did not answer. He genuinely did not know how a person answered that. And the child took his silence as permission for something else entirely. She walked across the rug to the leather chair in front of his desk, the chair that men twice her weight sat down in only after they had been told to, and she set her crayon tin on the seat. Then she took hold of the back of it with both hands and dragged it with an effort that made her whole body shake 2 inches closer to the desk. Then 2 more. Dante watched her do it. He did not help her. He did not stop her either, and afterward he would not be able to explain that part to himself. She climbed up. She knelt on the seat because kneeling made her tall enough. She looked at the stack of documents at his left elbow, chose the top one as though it had been set out for her, and pulled it in front of her. She opened the tin. The hinge had to be persuaded. She persuaded it, and she began to draw. Her tongue came out of the corner of her mouth. Her whole small forehead folded up with concentration. A red crayon squeaked against the paper of a bonded warehouse, manifest worth more money than most men on that estate would see in 10 years. Dante Corsaro, who had spent 7 years learning how to control any room he walked into, sat frozen behind his own desk and could not, for reasons he did not understand and did not like, make himself lift a hand. He watched her draw for 4 minutes. He counted them later. 4 minutes, and in those 4 minutes, his mind offered him in order every reasonable thing. Ring the bell. Stand up and carry her out yourself. Say one word in the voice, the one you use on grown men, and she'll cry and run, and it will be finished. And underneath all of it, quieter, the thing that had actually frozen him: "If you sit here one more minute, You are going to want this. That was the danger, not the child, the wanting. He had spent 5 years dismantling the part of himself that wanted things. It had been the hardest work he had ever done, and he had done it well. And here was a 5-year-old with a dented tin undoing it by simply existing in his line of sight. He opened his mouth to end it, and she looked up. She looked at him for a long, considering moment, the way you look at something you are deciding about. Her eyes went over his face, the beard, the collar of his shirt, the black lines of ink that came up out of it onto his throat. She frowned slightly, like a problem had presented itself. Then she reached across the desk with the red crayon and drew a slow, deliberate, wobbling line straight down his left cheek. Dante did not move. He felt the drag of the wax on his skin. He felt her breath because she was close enough for that, and she was breathing through her mouth the way children do when they are concentrating. She sat back and looked at her work. There, she said, satisfied. Now you have one too. Two women reached that doorway at the same time, and afterward, neither of them could say who had run and who had walked. Cecily got there first. She saw her daughter kneeling on Dante Corsaro's chair. She saw the red line down the man's face. She saw the ruined document under Josie's hands, and she saw in one flat instant every single thing this was going to cost. She went down onto her knees in the corridor before she had finished understanding what she was looking at, both palms flat on the floor. Her voice came out of her, cracked in half. Sir, I'm so sorry. She's 5. She doesn't know. Please, don't put my daughter out. I'll pay for the paper. I'll pay for all of it, please. Margot arrived one step behind her and did not go down. Margot stood in that doorway and did not move and did not breathe, and what she was looking at was not the crayon and not the document. What she was looking at was Dante's face, because in 8 years she had cataloged every expression that man had. She knew the flat one and the tired one and the one that came before somebody got hurt. She had learned to read him the way sailors read water, and she had earned that knowledge one silent morning at a time, standing outside that door with a folded newspaper, learning which days she should knock and which days she should simply leave it on the sideboard and walk away. And the thing on his face right now was not in her catalog at all. Josie, who had heard her mother's voice go strange, looked around and understood immediately that she was in trouble, and her chin started to go. Dante saw it. He saw the chin go and something in his chest turned over sideways, and Dante Corsaro started to laugh. It came out low and rough at the edges, like something that had traveled a very long distance underground to reach the surface. And it did not last long, but it happened. It happened in front of 3 witnesses. It happened with a red crayon line down his face and a 5-year-old kneeling on his chair. Cecily lifted her head off the floor and stared at him. Margot's hand found the doorframe. Get up, Dante said to Cecily. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the drawing on the ruined manifest, a house too many windows, a fat spiral of smoke, 3 people out, front holding hands. Off the floor. I don't want you down there. Cecily got up so fast she stumbled. It's $140,000 page, he said. Take her and feed her. That was the whole of it, 19 words. Cecily lifted Josie off the chair and got her out of that room fast and did not start shaking until she was around 2 corners, and then she had to stop and put her back against the wall and hold her daughter's face against her shoulder so the child would not see her mother's hands. Josie, who had understood approximately 1/10 of what had just happened, patted her mother's arm. He's got a sad face, she reported, even when he laughs. Did you see? Cecily had not seen. Cecily had been on the floor. Behind them in the study, Dante sat alone with a red line down his face and did not reach for a cloth to wipe it. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in 5 years, which was open the bottom left drawer of that desk, the deep one, the one that stuck, and take out an envelope of things he had never been able to make himself throw away. And he put the drawing in it and shut the drawer and sat there with both hands flat on the wood, waiting for the feeling in his chest to go away. It did not go away. By 7 that evening, 4 separate people in the household had described the event to somebody else, and the version that reached the kitchens had grown considerably. In one telling, the child had climbed onto the desk. In another, Dante had picked her up. In a third, which the cook did not believe, and repeated, anyway, he had let her keep the pen. Bruno Ferro heard it at the gate and said nothing, because Bruno Ferro had worked that gate for 11 years and had made an entire career out of saying nothing. Margot heard all of it because everything in that house came to Margot eventually. She went through her evening exactly as she always did. She checked the linens, she logged the deliveries, she went up the west staircase and avoided the second stair from the top because it creaked. And she had known that it creaked for 8 years and had never once told anyone because it was hers. That was the thing nobody understood about Margot Renard. She had never asked that man for anything. She had never made a single move in his direction, never let her hand brush his in a doorway, never once said his name in a lower voice than she used for anyone else. She had done something she considered far more honorable than that. She had stayed. She had stayed through the year everyone else left when the house was so full of grief that 2 maids quit in 1 week. She had stayed through the second year when he did not speak to anyone for 9 days. She was the one who knew that on the 11th of June, the curtains in the dining room stayed drawn from morning to midnight. And she was the one who drew them every single year without being told. And he had never thanked her because she had never let him know it was deliberate. And somewhere between the second year and the third, without asking her own permission, she had fallen in love with him. It was a love with no witnesses. He had never looked at her the way a man looks at a woman he wants. He had never given her the smallest reason. But she had watched him carry that grief winter after winter, and she had built herself a story to survive it, and the story went like this. I was here for the worst of it, and when he is finally ready, and he will be ready one day, the first person he will see is me. She had believed that story for 6 years, and that afternoon a 5-year-old had gotten a laugh out of him in 4 minutes. Margot sat on the edge of her bed with the lamp off for a long time. She was not a stupid woman, and she did not lie to herself about small things, so she made herself say it plainly in her own head, once I am jealous of a child. And then she put it away and told herself it was only the shock of the day and that it would be gone by morning. It was not gone by morning. There was one more thing, and it was older than Dante Corsaro, and it went back to a 2-room apartment above a laundromat on the west side of the city. Margot had been 9 when she first noticed it. There had been a neighbor, an old woman who came up the stairs to borrow something, and Margot had opened the door and answered her politely and offered to help carry it, and the woman had looked past her at 4-year-old Cecily sitting on the floor doing nothing at all, and her whole face had changed. That was the first time. It was not the last time. Aunts did it. Teachers did it. Boys did it later, and then men. Cecily never chased any of it. That was the part that had always been unbearable. Cecily did not even try. She simply existed in a room, and the room bent toward her, the way rooms do toward some people and never do toward others. Margot had worked for every scrap of attention she had ever received in her life. She had left school to help with the rent. She had scrubbed floors in 3 houses before this one. She had made herself so useful, so quiet, so exactly right that she had become the only person a man like Dante Corsaro could stand to have in his hallway. She had built that. And now her sister was back, sleeping 2 floors below her, wearing a uniform Margot had handed her in a house Margot had made with a little girl who walked into locked rooms and got laughed at instead of thrown out. Margot licked and told herself she was a good sister. She was in her own accounting, still a good sister. Downstairs, Cecily could not sleep either. Josie had gone out like a light at 8, one hand still closed around a crayon. And Cecily had sat on the edge of that narrow bed and watched her daughter breathe for an hour, which was a thing she had done every night for a year and a half without ever admitting to herself that she was doing it. She had been counting exits since the night the 3 men stood in her kitchen. It was automatic now. She had counted them in the bus station, and she had counted them in the corridor outside the laundry annex, and she had counted them without meaning to in the doorway of a room where she had just been on her knees. She kept thinking about the way the man had said off the floor. Not gently. There had been nothing gentle in it, but he had said it before he said anything about the document, and Cecily Renard had spent 4 years married to a man who could make an apology sound like a threat, and she had gotten very good at hearing what order things came in. She did not know what to do with it. So she put it down and picked up the practical thing, which was that her sister had given her one instruction, and she had broken it inside 4 days. She went and found Margot at 10 that night to say so. I'm going to keep her in the room, Cecily said. During the days, I'll figure something out. Margot, I swear to you it won't happen again. Margot took her hands. Margot's hands were always warm. It was one of the first things people noticed about her. It's finished, she said. It's done. He's forgotten it already. That's how men like him are. She smiled. But listen to me. You have to understand what this house is. There was a wife. There was a little girl, 5 years old, same as Josie. She let that land. They died. And he has not been able to look at a child since, not one, not for a second. Today he was kind to you, Cecily, and I don't think you understand how much that cost him. Cecily's eyes filled. So keep her away from him, Margot said. Not because he'll be angry, because it hurts him. Do you understand me? Every time she gets near him, it hurts him. It was, Margot thought afterward, the cleverest thing she had ever said in her life. Every word of it was true. And she had assembled those true words into a shape that would keep her sister's daughter out of that study, and she had done it in under a minute without raising her voice, holding her sister's hands. Cecily nodded and cried and thanked her and went back down and slept badly. Margot went upstairs and slept very well for the first night in a week. 3 days after that, Dante Corsaro did not come home until after midnight. He did the same thing the following night and the night after. He told himself it was scheduling. He had the harbor meetings and the thing with the customs broker and a problem developing on the East Bank that would need his attention before the month was out. It was a reasonable stretch of long days. Any man in his position had them. That was the story, and it held up right until the fourth night when he found himself sitting in his own car outside his own gate at 11:40 with the engine off, waiting for what he did not immediately let himself ask. The answer was that the servant's wing went dark at 11:30, and if he went in at 11:45, he would not have to walk past the kitchen door. And if he did not walk past the kitchen door, he would not see a pair of very small shoes sitting on the mat. He had seen them once on the second night. He had stopped walking. He had stood in his own hallway for 11 seconds looking at a pair of child's shoes. He was not going to do that again. So he waited in the car until the lights went out, and then he went in through the side, and he told himself the whole time that this was not avoidance. This was discipline. This was the exact same discipline that had kept him alive in the 7 years since his father died, and the 2 years before that, when nobody thought he would last a season. He was a man who had held an entire organization together by refusing to want things. He could certainly manage a 5-year-old. Josie did not know she was being avoided. She was 5. She knew that the man with the sad face and the pictures on his neck lived somewhere in the big part of the house, and she knew the sound his car made coming through the gate because it was deeper than the other cars, and every single time she heard it, she ran to whatever window was nearest and got up on whatever was under it and pressed her face to the glass to watch him get out. Her mother caught her at it twice and took her down and told her no. She did it anyway. And on the 7th night, the night before the thing that changed everything, Dante Corsaro came in at 11:45 through the side entrance, the way he had trained himself to, and went up the back stairs and walked down his own corridor toward his own study. And stopped, because taped to the outside of his study door, at exactly the height of a 5-year-old's reach, was a piece of thick paper. A house, too many windows, a door in the middle, smoke coming out of the chimney in a fat red spiral, and out front in a row, holding hands, 3 people. A tall one, a middle one, and a small one. Dante stood in his own hallway at 11:45 at night and looked at it for a long time. Then he took it down very carefully so that the tape would not tear the corners. And he carried it inside with him, and he sat down at his desk and he opened the bottom left drawer, the deep one, the one that stuck. There was already something in it. He put the second one on top of the first, and he closed the drawer, and he sat there in the dark with both hands flat on the wood. And for the first time in 5 years, Dante Corsaro said a name out loud in that house. Mira, he said. Nobody heard him. 2 floors above Margot, Renard lay awake and listened to the house settle, and did not know that the war she was about to start had already been lost days ago by a child with a dented tin who could not reach the top of a door and had taped her drawing as high as her arms would go. The drawing stayed in the drawer for 2 days, and in those 2 days, Dante Corsaro did not go near the servants' wing, did not ask a single question about a child, and got almost nothing done. He read the same customs report 4 times. He sat through a meeting with a broker who had been stealing from him for 11 months and let the man leave the room without knowing he'd been found out, which was not mercy, it was distraction, and Dante knew the difference. Twice he caught himself listening, not for anything, just listening the way a man listens for a sound he has told himself he doesn't want to hear. On the 3rd morning he broke. He came down the west staircase at 7, which was an hour he had not used in 5 years, and he went the long way past the kitchen and he did not admit to himself what he was doing until he was already doing it. The shoes were on the mat. He stood there, and a voice behind him said, "Sir." Cecily Renard had come around the corner with an armload of linen and stopped so hard she nearly dropped it. Her face did the thing Dante had seen 1,000 times on 1,000 faces. The recalculation, the fast inventory of what a person had just been caught doing and what it might cost. Except she had not been caught doing anything. He had. "She's in the room," Cecily said quickly. "She's in the room, sir. She hasn't been out. I've kept her." "I didn't ask." "No, sir." He should have walked. That was the entire thing he had come down the stairs promising himself. Walk past, go out the front, get in the car. "She doesn't eat the crusts," he said. Cecily blinked at him. "On the sandwiches, the plates come back to the kitchen. She eats everything else and leaves the crusts in a stack." He was aware of how it sounded. He said it anyway. "Is that only here, or does she always do that?" Cecily stood there with her arms full of sheets and looked at the most dangerous man in Louisiana ask her about sandwich crusts, and something in her chest went very still. "Always," she said. "Since she was 2, she says the middle is the real part." Dante nodded once. Then he left. He thought about it in the car for 40 minutes. That was how it started. And it started so small that neither of them could have pointed at a day and said there. He did not seek her out. He simply stopped avoiding the corridors. And the corridors of that house were full of Cecily Renard because Margot had made sure they were. And every few days he would stop and put down another question, like a coin on a table he refused to sit at. Did she wake in the night? She sleeps hard. She slept hard since she was born. It used to frighten me. Does she startle at loud noises? No, sir. Never has. That one he thought about for 2 days because in his experience, children who grew up in houses like the one Cecily had left were the ones who did startle, who flinched at a raised hand before it was raised, who learned the weather of a man before they learned the alphabet. He had known men who came out of childhoods like that. He had employed several of them. So he asked her the next time, and he asked it flat. How did she not learn to be afraid? Cecily set down what she was holding. Took her time. "Because I got her out before she could," she said. 4 nights before I knocked on that door. 4 nights, sir. That's all the margin I had." And then she picked the linens back up and kept walking because she had decided a long time ago that she was not going to be a woman who cried in hallways. Margot watched all of it and counted. She counted the mornings he came down the west staircase. She counted the number of times her sister came back to the kitchens with that particular expression, the one Cecily got when she had been treated like a person instead of a problem. She counted on a Tuesday the fact that Dante Corsaro canceled a harbor meeting at 4 in the afternoon and was inside the house by 5:20. He had not been inside that house at 5:20 in 5 years. So Margot began to adjust things. She did it beautifully. That was the thing about Margot. She had 8 years of knowing exactly how that household breathed, and she used every hour of it. "The East linens need airing," she'd say, catching Cecily's elbow at 10 to 6 with a bright, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry it'll take you the whole evening. Don't worry about the kitchen. I'll see to Mr. Corsaro's supper." She discovered urgent work in the greenhouse. She discovered that the guest wing, which had not been used in 2 years, needed inventorying, and that it needed Cecily specifically because Cecily had the better handwriting. She rescheduled the laundry runs to fall precisely across the hours the gate reported his car coming in. And when Dante did come home early, Margot was the first person he saw, every time. She made sure of it, and she made it look like coincidence, and coincidence is not difficult to manufacture when you are the person who writes the schedule. To Josie, she used a different voice entirely. She would go down on one knee in the corridor and take both of the child's hands in her warm ones and smile. "Uncle Dante is very busy today, sweetheart. He's got grown-up work. It's not a good day to bother him." She was very careful never to say it more than once in a day. She was very careful to always have a caramel in her pocket when she said it. She had thought that part through. A child who is refused and given nothing learns to resent the person refusing. A child who is refused and given a caramel learns to associate the refusal with kindness and does not learn anything at all. None of it worked. It did not work because Josie Renard did not operate on schedules or on caramels. She operated on a homing instinct that was very nearly supernatural, and every time she would take the caramel, Say thank you, wait about 4 minutes, slip her hand out of Margot's and walk directly to whichever room in that enormous house currently contained Dante Corsaro. She was never wrong about which room it was, not once. Margot never worked out how she did it. And the second thing that did not work was worse because Margot had not planned for it at all. Dante and Cecily kept finding each other anyway. Not in the study, not anywhere Margot could have anticipated and blocked. They found each other in the stupidest, most ordinary places at the back door at 11 at night when one of them was locking up and the other was coming in, at the bottom of the stairs, in the kitchen at 10 because he had come down for something and she had come down for a glass of water, and neither of them had expected the other. And there was a full 60 seconds of two people standing in a kitchen not knowing what to do with their hands. Margot could schedule the whole house. She could not schedule that. The rain came in the second week, and it came hard, and it kept Dante home for an entire evening for the first time in years, and that was the night Cecily told him the rest. She had not planned to. She had come down for tea because Josie had been asleep since 8, and the room had gotten too quiet, and he was already there, and she'd stopped in the doorway and said sorry, and turned to go. Sit down, he said. She sat down. For a while, neither of them said anything. He didn't do the thing men did where they filled silence, and she noticed it, and it was the noticing that undid her, because Wade had never once let a silence stand. Wade had filled every silence in 4 years of marriage with his own voice. And then Dante asked her the question he had been circling for 2 weeks. Who is he? Cecily looked at her hands, and then she told him. She told it flat with no decoration, the way she had rehearsed it for nobody. She told him about a young man who walked into the diner where she worked and said on their second conversation that she had the kind of face a man could build a life around. She told him about the paperback of poems on the third date and about how 6 months later he had remembered which one had made her cry and how she had thought at the time that this was the largest thing anyone had ever done for her. She told him about the freight terminal and the drinking and the card rooms. She told him about the flour tin. Then she told him about the diaper bag, and her voice changed on that one because that was the night she had understood that he had gone looking, that he had stood in that room while she was out and searched a bag that belonged to his own daughter and taken $41 out of the lining and put it back exactly as he'd found it so she wouldn't know until she needed it. The first time he hit me, he cried after, she said. He cried harder than I did. He swore on his mother, and I want you to understand, sir, I wasn't stupid. I knew. I knew the whole time what that was. She pressed her thumb hard into her own palm. I stayed anyway. That's the part I can't explain to anybody. Not because I thought he'd change. Because I thought if I was just patient enough, the other one would come back. The one with the book. Dante did not move. And then 4 nights before I came here, 3 men were in my kitchen at 10 o'clock telling him how long he had. And Josie was asleep down the hall. Her jaw locked, and the short one turned his head. Toward the room, Dante said, toward the sound of her breathing. She looked up at him for the first time. He looked at my daughter like she was a payment plan. The rain went on against the windows. Dante did not tell her he was sorry. He did not tell her she was safe now, which was the sentence she had braced for and would not have believed. He did not offer her one single soft thing. What he said was, you got her out in 4 nights with no money and nowhere to go. Most men I know couldn't do that with a crew in a week's notice. Cecily's face came apart and she put her hand over her mouth and got herself back under control in about 6 seconds, which was faster than most people, and Dante noted that too. Don't do that, she said when she could. Don't be nice to me. I don't have any place to put it. That wasn't nice, he said. That was accurate. He started leaving the study door open in the evenings. He never said so. He never announced it, never invited anyone, never once acknowledged that the door, which had been shut for 5 years, was now from about 7 o'clock onward, standing open by roughly 8 inches. Josie noticed on the first night. By the 4th night, she had a place on the rug and a system crayon tin on the left, paper on the right, the finished ones in a stack she guarded with 1 foot. She did not talk to him while he worked. That was the astonishing thing. She talked constantly to everyone else in that house, to the cook, to the cat, to Bruno at the gate, to the koi at length. But in that room, she went quiet and worked, and the only sounds in there for 2 hours at a stretch were his pen and her crayon. A jar for the crayons appeared on the low shelf. Nobody asked where it came from. A stack of blank paper appeared on the side table, And it was the good paper, the heavy cream stock, from his own desk, and the household staff understood without being told that nobody was to comment on that either. A cloth doll with a stitched face took up residence on the arm of the leather chair and stayed there through 3 cleanings because Margot had quietly instructed the girls not to move it, and she had given that instruction in a perfectly pleasant voice while something behind her ribs turned to stone, and Dante Corsaro started coming home early. He did not admit it. He simply found that the harbor meetings ended sooner than they used to, that the drive back through his own gate had stopped feeling like the beginning of another empty night and started feeling like the last hour of a long day. He found that he was annoyed when things ran over. He had never in his life been annoyed by work running over. Work running over was what his life was. He found one evening that he had been sitting with the same page in front of him for 11 minutes listening to a 5-year-old hum tunelessly at his feet, and that he was not going to get any more work done, and that he did not particularly mind. It happened on a Tuesday close to 11. The crayon had stopped moving at some point after 10, and he had not noticed. When he finally looked up from the ledger, Josie was curled sideways against the base of the sofa with her cheek flat on the rug and her mouth slightly open, one hand still loosely closed around a red crayon. He set the pen down. He looked at her for a long moment and did not think anything at all, which was itself unusual because Dante Corsaro had not gone 30 seconds without thinking since he was 19 years old. He could have rung the bell. He could have sent for her mother, and that would have been the correct thing. And there was a version of the next 4 minutes in which he did exactly that, and everything after went differently. He stood up. He crossed the room. He got down on one knee and slid one arm under her shoulders and one under the bend of her knees. And he lifted her the way a man lifts something breakable he does not trust himself to be carrying. Her head tipped against his collar like it had been designed to go there. The crayon fell out of her hand and rolled once on the rug, and he did not stop to pick it up. He walked her down the corridor slowly. He was not in a hurry. The house was doing the thing old houses do at that hour, and he was aware of the weight of her and of the fact that she was warm and of a very specific, very dangerous quiet that had opened up in his own chest. And halfway down that corridor, Josie stirred. She didn't wake. Her eyes never opened. She made a small, satisfied sound in the back of her throat and lifted both arms without one conscious thought in her head and looped them around his neck and turned her face into his shoulder. And she said one word into his collar. "Daddy." Dante stopped walking. He stood in the middle of that hallway holding a sleeping child, and he could not move. He could not make his feet go forward. He could not fill his own chest with air. Every mechanism he had built in 5 years, every rule, every locked door, every morning, he had gotten up and put the thing back together. All of it went down at once, quietly, without a sound, the way a building comes down when the charges are set right. That word had traveled 5 years to reach him. I had last heard it directed at himself on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon from a car seat through a rolled-down window, and he had raised his hand and turned around and gone back inside because he had a call to take. He had a call to take. He closed his eyes. He did not lower her. He did not shift her weight. He stood there with a 5-year-old's arms around his neck and let it go through him, all of it, 5 years of it, and he did not make a sound. At the far end of that corridor, Margot Renard stopped with a tray in her hands. She saw the child asleep on his shoulder. She saw the small arms around his neck. And she saw, because she was close enough and because she had spent 8 years learning to read that man's face from further away than this, the wet along the underside of his eyes. Margot had waited 6 years to see that. She had held vigil through winters for it. She had drawn the dining room curtains on the 11th of June for 6 years running for it. She had believed with the total belief of a woman who has no other structure to stand inside that one day, that man would break open and the first person he would see would be her. It had taken a 5-year-old 3 weeks. Margot turned around before he could see her and went back the way she had come and set the tray down in her own room and sat on the edge of her bed with the lamp off. She did not cry. She had never been a woman who cried. She sat in the dark, and a very small, very cold question assembled itself out of nothing and stood up and looked at her. If the child weren't here, would everything go back? She looked at it, and she did not say no. After that night, the sabotage stopped being deniable, even to Margot. A message came in on a Thursday that Mr. Corsaro would be home for supper and would eat in the small dining room. It reached Cecily an hour and 10 minutes late, by which time the food was cold, and Margot had already fixed the problem herself and been very gracious about it in front of him. A drawing Josie had made specifically for him. She had said so out loud 3 times. This one is for him, went into the general shuffle of the household and ended up at the bottom of a drawer in the linen room and stayed there. Margot began speaking to the housemaids about Cecily, and she did it the way careful people do it, which is not by saying anything untrue. She would sigh and say her sister had been through something terrible and it had left her fragile and that they should be patient with her. She would mention in passing that Cecily had been so exhausted lately, she'd gone to bed with Josie still up in the sitting room. She said it with love in her voice. She said all of it with love in her voice. And every single one of those true things she wrote down that night in a small notebook she kept in the drawer under her folded uniforms with the date beside it, and she did not permit herself to examine why. She was keeping a record. Then the fever came and everything Margot had been building went sideways in a single night. Josie was fine at supper. She was fine an hour after supper. Then she went quiet in a way that was not her, and Cecily put a hand on her forehead and pulled it back. By 10, the child was too hot to hold. Cecily stripped her down and sponged her and counted out loud in a steady voice so Josie wouldn't hear anything underneath it, and the number on the thermometer did not come down, no matter how long she stared at it. And then Josie's eyes lost focus and rolled slightly, and Cecily heard herself make a sound she had never made before. 3 corridors away, Dante heard footsteps that did not belong to that hour of that house. I was standing before he understood why. He crossed the corridors fast and pushed the door open without knocking, and what he saw was a small body gone limp in the curve of a woman's arm, hair stuck damp to a forehead, a chest going up and down, much too fast under thin cotton. And for a fraction of a second, Dante Corsaro could not move. Because it lined up exactly with a thing he had spent 5 years refusing to look at directly. Another small girl, another still body, a room he had come to too late, and his hand closed on the door frame, hard enough that the wood complained. Something in him tried to turn him around. Then Josie's eyes opened. They found him across the room, unfocused and glassy, and one thin arm came up off the blanket toward him, shaking. Uncle Dante. I was across that room in 3 strides. He did not call for the driver. He did not call for anyone. He took the child out of her mother's arms himself and wrapped her in the wool blanket off the end of the bed and said in a voice that left no space in the world for a question, "Coat, follow me." Cecily followed him. He carried Josie down the west staircase and out the side and put her in the front seat and drove himself, one hand on the wheel and the other curved around the bundle beside him, and he made a 19-minute drive in 11. There was no waiting at the hospital the Corsaro family kept on the east side. Doors open. People came at a run. By 11:15, there was a line taped along the back of a small hand in a monitor going somewhere above her head, and the doctor said words like infection and fluids and hours, and said things would be clearer by morning, which is the sentence doctors use when they do not want to say the other one. Dante did not leave the chair. Cecily sat on the far side of the bed and watched him, and what she saw was a man holding a 5-year-old's hand in both of his own, like it was the last thing he owned. Twice a nurse came in and had to ask him to move his arm, and he moved it and put it right back. At 4 in the morning, Cecily said quietly, "You can go, sir. You have things." "No," Dante said. That was all. He didn't look up. At 5, the fever broke. Her fingers, even asleep, did not let go of his. Then, sometime after that, before the light came, Dante got up and went out into the corridor. He didn't go far. He went as far as the bench across from the door and sat down on it with his elbows on his knees because he could still see the door from there, and he needed to still be able to see the door. And sitting there, he finally did the thing he had been refusing to do for 3 weeks, which was look straight at it. He had built himself a story. He was aware that he had built it. The story was that this child had gotten past his guard because she was a shape in the world that resembled a shape he had lost, that when he looked at her, he was really looking through her at somebody who could no longer be looked at. That it was grief doing it, that it was a trick of the eye, that it wasn't real, and therefore it wasn't dangerous, and therefore he could stop it anytime he chose. He had let himself have that story because it was safer than the alternative. Sitting on that bench with his hands hanging between his knees, Dante understood that the story had run out. She did not look like Mira. She had never looked like Mira. He knew every line of his daughter's face, and this was not it, not the eyes, not the mouth, nothing. What he loved was the way Josie tilted her head when she was thinking. Like a thought was something heavy she had to physically balance. He loved that she said ambulance wrong every single time and had never let one adult on earth correct her. He loved that she broke every cookie she was handed exactly in half and pushed one of the halves across the desk toward whoever was closest, even when the closest person was him, even when he had never once asked for it, even the time he had said no and she had left it there anyway and gone back to her drawing. He loved the exact weight of her hand in his when she was pulling him somewhere. None of that had anything to do with anyone who was gone. She had not replaced his daughter. Nobody was ever going to replace his daughter. What she had done in 3 weeks was prove a thing he had spent 5 years arranging his entire life around, disproving that the heart he'd buried on a causeway was still apparently in working order and had simply been waiting for somebody short enough to walk under the guard. And the second thing arrived right behind it, and it was worse. Because if that was true, then the rule was true too. To love something is to hand your enemies a weapon shaped exactly like it. He had made that rule out of the wreck of a car. He had never had cause to doubt it. And he had spent the last 3 weeks handing a 5-year-old the loaded end of it, and every man on the East Bank who wanted something from Dante Corsaro was going to find out about her eventually, because they always found out. He put his face in his hands. The door opened, and Cecily came out with a hospital blanket around her shoulders and the look of a woman who had not slept, but had in the last hour remembered how breathing worked. She crossed over and sat down next to him without asking. They didn't say much. "Doctor came back," she said. "I heard." Then after a while, "She asked for you. Before she went under, she asked where you were." Dante didn't answer that for a long moment. "You should take her away from me," he said. Cecily turned her head. "Not today, not this week, but you should be thinking about it." His voice was completely level, which was somehow the worst part. "There are 11 men in this city who would use her against me if they knew what she was to me. Maybe 14, and she is starting to be something to me, and I don't know how to make that stop, and I have already buried one little girl for the crime of belonging to me." Cecily sat with that. "Sir," she said finally, "she taped a picture to your door." "I know. She's 5. She doesn't know what you are." She pulled the blanket tighter. "But I do. I've known since the first week, and I put her to bed every night in your house anyway." At the estate 3 miles away, the telephone in the servants' hall rang just before 6. Margot answered it on the second ring because she had been beside it since 2. She listened to a brief report. Fever broke at 5. Child stable. Mr. Corsaro remaining at the hospital until midday. Mrs. Renard remaining with him. She said the correct words in the correct order. She thanked the man on the other end. She hung up. And then she stood alone in the pantry for a very long time, with her hands still resting on the receiver. It was not the child. That was what she understood standing there. It had stopped being about the child. A man does not stay in a hospital chair for 7 hours for a housemaid's daughter, and then remain until midday and have somebody call the house to say that the mother is remaining with him. Remaining with him. Margot took her hand off the receiver. She got the household up at 6:30 like she did every morning. She did the deliveries and the linens and the schedule. She was pleasant to everyone. 2 of the girls said later that she'd seemed like she was in a good mood. And at 4 o'clock that afternoon, when her shift ended, Margot Renard put on a plain coat and pulled a scarf up around her chin and walked out the servants' gate and got on a bus going west. She got off in the neighborhood she and Cecily had grown up in. She went into the grocery on Loomis, where her mother used to buy bread, and bought nothing. She sat at the counter of the diner where a girl she'd known in high school was still waiting tables and ordered coffee she didn't drink. And she said her sister's married name quietly, the way a person asks after old friends, and watched the face of every woman who heard it. It took her 4 evenings. On the 4th, a woman leaned across the counter and told her that Wade Turnbull had lost the apartment and been put out of his cousin's place and owed money in 3 neighborhoods now instead of 1, and had last been seen in a bar on Ashland with sawdust on the floor. Margot thanked her. She left $1 on the counter and walked out to the corner and stood there in the dark for a while with her hands in her coat pockets, and she told herself very clearly and very reasonably exactly what she was doing. She was going to let a father know where his daughter was. That was all. That was the whole of it. A man had a right to know where his own child was living, and once he knew, he would come and there would be trouble, and the trouble would make the child impossible to keep, and Cecily would have to take Josie and go somewhere else, somewhere far, and the house would go quiet again, and the door at the end of that corridor would close, and everything would settle back into the shape it was supposed to have. Nobody would get hurt. That was the sentence she used. She used it several times on the walk to the bus stop, and it held up all the way home, and it held up while she hung her coat, and it held up while she lay down. It did not hold up at 2 in the morning when she woke and lay in the dark and remembered with absolute clarity the shape of her sister's jaw 4 weeks ago when it had still been the color of old paper. Margot lay very still and looked at the ceiling and made herself a promise. She would only tell him where. She would not tell him anything else. Cecily went down onto her knees on the flagstones. She did not scream. Adele was screaming behind her, and one of the guards was already running from the front of the house, and somebody was shouting for the gate to be closed. But Cecily Renard knelt in the middle of that garden and did not make a sound. She reached out and picked up the tin. And then she started putting the crayons back into it one by one, in the terrible mechanical way of a woman whose mind has stopped and whose hands have not. Blue, yellow, the brown one that was worn to a stub. She picked them up off the stone and fitted them into the tin in a row, carefully in order, as though putting them right would put her daughter right. She got to the red one last. Her hand went out for it and stopped hovering, and she could not make her fingers close. She left it on the stone. Adele was on her knees behind her, sobbing and saying 7 steps. It was 7 steps, I swear to God. It was 7 steps over and over, and Cecily did not hear a word of it. Somebody put a hand on her shoulder, and she did not feel it. Somebody said her name 3 times. Then a woman's voice came across that garden. Margot's voice, high and strange, saying, "What's happened? What's happened? Where is she?" And Cecily turned her head and looked up at her sister. She would think about that moment for years afterward. She had no reason on earth to suspect Margot. Not one. What she saw was her sister's face doing something that did not match the words coming out of it, and her brain filed it away without knowing why, and then let it go, because her daughter was gone. "Somebody call him," Cecily said. Her voice came out of her flat and dead. "Call him now!" The call reached Dante on the 32nd floor of a building downtown in the middle of a discussion about the arrival schedule of a container ship out of Genoa. The man across the table was mid-sentence. Dante listened to 11 seconds of the voice in his ear. He set the phone down on the table very gently, which was the only part of it anyone in that room ever talked about afterward. He did not slam it. He set it down like it might break. Then he stood up. "Gentlemen," he said, "we're finished." Nobody argued. One of them tried and got about 2 words out and then looked at Dante Corsaro's face and stopped. And later he told people that he had done business with that man for 9 years and had never once been frightened of him until that afternoon in that room. Dante was in his car before anyone had gotten up. He drove himself back across the city at a speed that would have killed a lesser driver, and he did not think about the road at all because his mind had gone somewhere else entirely. It had gone to a stretch of causeway in fog 5 years ago, and a phone call he had taken standing in an office exactly like the one he had just walked out of. The same call, the same 11 seconds, the same hand setting the phone down. He had promised himself on the day of the funerals that he would never take that call again. He had made himself into a man who could not take that call again. He had locked a door and taken down photographs and forbidden a name and built a whole life out of the single principle that if you love nothing, nothing can be taken. And he had let a 5-year-old with a dented tin walk straight through all of it, and now he was doing 85 through the Garden District with both hands on the wheel and the same taste in his mouth as 5 years ago. When he came through the gate of that walled garden, everyone in it turned toward him at once. Cecily, Adele, 2 guards, a housekeeper frozen with a cloth in her hand, and then saw his face and looked away. He walked past all of them. He stopped in the middle of the flagstones and looked down. The red crayon was lying where it had stopped rolling. For one long moment, Dante Corsaro was not the head of anything. He was a man who had come home too late once, already standing in a place where it had happened again, and every one of those 5 years came up through him at once and hit the underside of his ribs. His shoulders moved, just once, sharply like a weight had shifted inside him. He crouched. He picked up the crayon and his hand was shaking so badly that the small red stick knocked twice against his own knuckles before he could close his fist around it. His men had worked for that man for years. Some of them had known his father. Not one of them had ever seen his hand shake. Bruno Ferro turned his head away, and he did it out of respect, and he was the only one who thought to. Dante stood up. And when he spoke, his voice was completely level, and that was worse than anything else that had happened in that garden. Find her. He looked at every man there one at a time and made each of them hold it. I don't care I don't care who it costs. Find her. The call came in on the private line in his study 50 minutes later. He picked it up on the second ring. Wade Turnbull's voice on the other end was almost pleasant, and that was the first thing that told Dante. This man had been coached because a father who has just taken his own child out of a garden does not sound relaxed. He confirmed unhurried that Josie was with him. He said she was fine. He said she'd been crying, but she was fine. Then he named a number. Then he named a make of car and a place and said he wanted both by dawn and that he was to be permitted out of the city without anyone following. Dante said nothing at all. He let the man talk the way he had let 10,000 men talk, and he listened for the things underneath the breathing, the pauses, the fact that Wade Turnbull was reading. Not from paper, but from something. Somebody had put those sentences in his head, and then Wade got to the last one, the one he had been saving. Do it exactly, Corsaro, he said, or you're going to lose another little girl. Cecily was standing at Dante's elbow. She made a sound in her throat, and both her hands came up over her mouth, and she staggered half a step backward into the desk. Because she knew that voice better than anyone alive, and she had heard every cruelty Wade Turnbull was capable of over 4 years, and she had never once heard him say a thing like that. I didn't know how to be cruel that way. Wade was cruel the way a drunk is cruel hot loud, aimed at whatever was closest. That sentence had been engineered. It had been built by somebody who knew exactly what Dante Corsaro had lost and exactly what it would do to him to hear it phrased like that. Dante hung up the phone. He stood with both palms flat on the desk and closed his eyes for a count of 3. He didn't write that, Cecily said. Her voice was shaking. Sir, he doesn't know about your wife. He doesn't know about your daughter. I never told him. I never told anybody. I know. Then how? Somebody in this house told him, Dante said. And that was the moment the study door opened. Wishheim, Margot stood in the doorway. She was white to the lips. Her hands were shaking worse than his had shaken in the garden, and she was holding onto the door frame because she could not stand up without it. Cecily turned around. Margot, thank God. It was me, Margot said. The room went absolutely still. What? It was me. She was not looking at her sister. She was looking at Dante because she had decided somewhere on the stairs that she was going to say the entire thing to his face and not stop. I found him 4 weeks ago. I went into the old neighborhood and I asked around until somebody gave me a name in a street, and I found him in a bar in Ashland, and I sat down next to him and I told him where she was. Cecily said no. I told myself I was only telling a father where his child was. Margot, he asked him questions over 4 evenings. She kept going and her voice was coming apart in the middle of every sentence, and she kept going anyway. About the gates, about the guard, about which afternoons ran light, about the garden and who watched her in it and whether it was always the same person. I answered him. I answered all of it. I told myself it was conversation. She finally looked at her sister. And he asked me if Mr. Corsaro had ever lost anybody, she said. And I told him. I told him about the causeway. I told him she was 5. Cecily did not scream at her. That was the thing that broke Margot in half. Cecily did not scream and did not swing at her and did not say one word. She just looked at her sister, really looked the way you look at a stranger who has walked into your house, and something went out of her face and did not come back. Dante came across that room in 3 strides. And for one instant, he was not a man at all. Margot saw it arrive in him, and she did not step back, and she would think later that not stepping back had been the only decent thing she had done in a month. Cecily got between them. She did not raise her voice. She put one hand flat on Dante's chest, and she said 2 words low and flat and absolute. Josie first. Dante stopped. He stood there breathing with a housekeeper's sister's hand on his sternum, and the whole organization would have gone to war on his word, and a woman who weighed 120 pounds stopped him with a syllable and a half. He stepped back. Talk, he said, and Margot gave him the last thing she had. There's a dry dock past the freight yards, she said, At the end of the gravel road, it's been closed for years. He asked me about it 3 separate times, and I didn't understand why, because it's not near the house. It's not near anything. I couldn't work out why he cared. Dante's head came up. Say that again. The dry dock past the freight yards. Bruno Ferro had come in behind her and was standing in the doorway, and Dante turned and looked at him. That's a Yates property, Bruno said. That single sentence rearranged the entire afternoon. Dante sat down on the edge of the desk, which he never did, and put his hand over his mouth for about 4 seconds. It was never a ransom, he said. No. He's not running. There's no car. There's no road out of the city. Dante looked up. Yates put a man with a grudge and a debt on the end of a wire and pointed him at my house and told him to name a number. He was never going to be paid and to say a sentence about a little girl that would put me in that dock tonight without thinking. Sir, he's not taking a hostage, Bruno. He's setting a table. Cecily had gone very still by the desk. What does that mean? She said. What does that mean, setting a table? Dante did not answer her because the answer was that Corbin Yates had spent 11 years learning that force against the Corsaros cost more than it returned and had therefore stopped using force and started using leverage. And the single most useful thing that could possibly happen to a man in Yates's position was for Dante Corsaro to die in a building Yates owned with a kidnapped child in it. 2 shots and a phone call to the right desk. Corsaro dead. Turnbull dead beside him, which solved a debt. And a Corsaro family with no head, no succession, and a federal file open on it by Friday. Dante stood up. Get everyone, he said, and Bruno the ones who came up with my father, not the young ones. They reached the dry dock in 40 minutes. 3 cars, no headlights, left a quarter-mile short down the gravel. The rest on foot through the weeds. The building had 1 light burning inside and a sliding door standing partly open, and every man there understood what an open door meant. Dante gathered them behind a stack of rotted pallets and gave his orders in something barely above a whisper. He's not alone. Yates has people in there, and they're not there for Turnbull. They're there for me. Assume the roof. Assume the catwalk. Assume the 2nd floor on the east side. He looked around at them. Now listen to me, because I will say this one time. No one fires a shot while that child is anywhere near a man. Not one. I don't care what you see. I don't care what he does to me. His voice did not change at all. If I go down in there, you get her out. That's the job. That's the whole job. Anybody who can't do that, walk back to the car now, and there's no hard feelings. Nobody walked. He split them 3 ways: front, rear, service door, the collapsed loading dock on the east side. He gave them 9 minutes to get set. Then he took off his coat, opened it, and handed his own pistol to Bruno Ferro. Bruno looked at it. Sir, he'll make me put it down anyway. If I put it down, that's 1 gun on the floor between us, and he can reach it. Dante was already walking. Better it's not there at all. Dante. Bruno used his name, which he had done perhaps 4 times in 11 years. You walk in there with nothing and you're not walking out. I know what I'm doing. No, sir, Bruno said. You know what you're willing to do. That's different. Dante stopped. He turned around and looked at the man who had stood at his gate for 11 years and said almost nothing in any of them. She's 5 years old, Dante said. And the last thing she saw was a man dragging her off a blanket. If I walk in there with a gun in my hand, that's the second thing she sees. He shook his head once. She's had enough of that today. He walked around to the front in the open with both hands held slightly out from his sides. Inside, Wade had her on a wooden crate under the 1 working bulb. Josie had her knees pulled up to her chest and her arms around them. Her face was streaked and dirty, and she was doing the small, hiccuping thing that comes after a child has been crying for a long time and has run out. The black ribbon was gone from her hair. She saw Dante the instant he came through the door. Uncle Dante. Wade moved fast. He crossed to the crate, got her by the upper arm, and hauled her against his side, and the sound she made when he did it went through Dante Corsaro like a blade going in sideways. He stopped where he was, and for 1 fraction of a second the shape of it lined up a small, trembling body pressed against a man's leg. A room he had gotten to too late, 5 years of it, standing right there in front of him. He held it up and he looked at it. And he found the one difference that mattered. She's still breathing. You're not too late. Put your weapon on the floor, Wade said. I don't have one. Bull. Open my coat. Dante did it slowly with 2 fingers on each side. He turned all the way around. Look at me. Nothing at the back, nothing at the ankle. I came in here empty. Wade stared at him. Why, he said. And that was the first thing Wade Turnbull had said all day that had not been written by somebody else. And Dante heard it and understood exactly how much room he had to work with. Because I want her back, Dante said, and dead men don't get given anything. He kept the man talking. That was the entire strategy, and it was the only one available. Keep Wade Turnbull's eyes on his face and off the child, and keep his mouth moving and let the minutes work. He asked about the money, how they wanted it, in what denominations, whether Wade had somewhere to put it. He asked about the car. He asked which road out of the city, and listened to the answer and knew inside 4 words that there was no road, that Wade had not thought about it for 1 second. Because Wade had never been intended to leave that building alive either. He asked whether Wade had eaten. He asked whether Wade knew what the child was allergic to. I was aware the entire time of the 2nd floor on the east side and of the fact that nobody up there had moved yet, which meant they were waiting for something. Waiting for Wade to finish. Waiting for the ransom conversation to be complete so that the shooting made sense afterward. He had maybe 4 minutes. He watched the pistol in Wade's hands start to get heavy, the way pistols get heavy in the hands of men who don't use them. And he watched Wade's other hand, the one with the unlit cigarette in it, start wanting something to do. Let me tell you something about the man paying your lawyer, Dante said. Wade's head came up. Corbin Yates, room above the garage on Ashland. Dante kept his voice conversational. How much do you owe him? $4,100, something like that. You don't know. Ask yourself why a man who's owed $4,100 buys you a suit and a very good attorney. Dante took half a step, no more. Ask yourself why he told you to name a number you were never going to get, and why he wrote you a line about my dead daughter, and why he told you to do it here, in a building with his name 3 shells deep on the deed. Wade's face changed. He told you nobody comes in the back, Dante said. Did he tell you who's already upstairs? And Wade Turnbull, because he was not a smart man, but he was not a stupid one either, and because he had spent 4 years being the person other people arrange things around, looked up. He looked up for less than a second, but his hand came down as he did it, dropping the pistol 4 inches toward his belt, while his other hand went for the pocket with the lighter in it, and that was all there was ever going to be. Dante's voice cracked across that concrete floor like something breaking. Josie, the child moved before Wade Turnbull could finish a thought. She twisted, she dropped, she came out from under his arm, low and fast, the way a small animal comes out of a hand, and his fingers closed on nothing where her shoulder had been, and then she was running. She came across that floor faster than anyone in that building would have believed a 5-year-old could run. And Dante went down onto one knee to catch her, got both arms around her, folded her into his chest, wrapped his coat around her head, and turned his own back to the pistol in one continuous movement, and it was not a decision, and there was no moment in which he considered it. 3 sides of that building came apart at once. His men came out of the dark, from the front and the rear and the east dock, and took Wade Turnbull down onto the concrete and disarmed him without firing a shot, exactly as they had been told. And above them on the catwalk on the east side, 2 men who had been waiting for a very specific outcome watched that outcome fail and made a decision, and one of them put a rifle on the back of a man kneeling in the open with a child in his arms. Bruno Ferro had come in through the rear door 40 seconds earlier. He was the only man in that building looking up. He did not shout a warning, because a warning takes a second and a half, and he did not have a second and a half. He crossed 9 feet of floor and put himself between the catwalk and Dante Corsaro's back, and he took it high in the chest and went down onto the concrete, and the second shot went into the wall, and then Dante's men opened up on the catwalk, and it was over in 11 seconds. Dante had Josie's face pressed into his coat with one hand across her ear. He held her there. He held her there through all of it, on one knee on that floor, with his own back exposed and his body wrapped around a 5-year-old, and he did not move until it stopped. Then he turned his head. Bruno was on his back 8 feet away. Dante could not put the child down. That was the thing. She had both fists closed in the front of his shirt, and she was screaming into his collar, and he could not put her down. So he stood up with her and walked over on his knees and went down again, beside the man who had worked his gate for 11 years. Bruno's eyes moved. Somebody was already tearing a coat apart and pressing it down and shouting for a car, and Dante got one hand under the man's head and held it up off the concrete. Look at me, Bruno. Look at me. Who is she? She's here. She's right here. She's not hurt. She's fine. Bruno's hand came up off the floor. It went out unsteady and found the edge of the coat Dante had wrapped around the child, and he closed his fingers in it. Just held on to it. Just needed to know it was there. Then it's all right, he said. Don't you do that. Dante's voice broke straight down the middle. Bruno, don't you do that? 11 years you stood at my gate, and I never once asked you a single thing about yourself. Do you understand me? 11 years. You get up and you let me fix that. Bruno's mouth moved. It might have been a smile. You never asked because you never had to, he said. He died on that floor a minute and a half later, with his hands still closed in the coat around a 5-year-old girl. Dante stayed where he was for a long moment. Then he reached over and closed the man's eyes with his thumb and forefinger, and he stood up with Josie in his arms. Wade Turnbull was face down on the concrete 11 feet away with 2 men on him. He was talking. He had been talking since they took him down, saying he hadn't known, saying nobody told him, saying he only wanted the money, saying it over and over into the floor. Dante's own pistol was in Bruno's coat 10 feet away. 2 seconds. That was all it would have taken. Nobody in that building would have said one word about it then or ever, and every man there was waiting for him to do it and had already forgiven him for it. He looked down instead. Josie had lifted her face out of his collar. Her eyes were enormous and red, and she was looking at him, not at the man on the floor, not at Bruno, at him, the way she had looked at him from a doorway a lifetime ago, with the whole of her attention. How was the thing she was going to remember about tonight? Whatever he did in the next 4 seconds was going to be inside that child for the rest of her life. Dante turned his back on Wade Turnbull. He goes to the police, he said, alive. Every piece of paper on him goes with him. Every name he's got, I want written down before morning. He was already walking toward the door, and somebody carry Bruno. He doesn't leave here on the floor. The gates of the estate were already open when the car came up the drive. Cecily had not moved off the front steps in 5 hours. 2 of the girls had brought her a coat, and she had not put it on, and it was lying on the step beside her. He saw the small honey-colored head against Dante's shoulder as he got out. She came down those steps at a run. Josie was reaching for her before Dante had straightened up, and then mother and daughter went into each other on the gravel. Cecily on her knees, her face pressed into the top of her daughter's hair. Both of them crying without one single adult dignity between them, and Josie saying, Mama, Mama, Mama into her neck. Dante stood 1 step behind them and said nothing at all. He had no idea what to do with his hands. I was still standing like that a minute later, when Josie lifted her face off her mother's shoulder and looked back at him. She reached out one hand, and Dante Corsaro, who had walked into a building that afternoon with nothing in his hands and had come out of it carrying a man's death, lowered himself down onto his knees on the gravel. Josie leaned over with one fist still holding her mother's sleeve, took hold of his shirt with the other and pulled him in until the 3 of them were a shape on that drive that had no name anybody was willing to say out loud. Nobody said it. All 3 of them understood that it had already been said. Josie fell asleep at 9 that night in her mother's bed, with both hands closed around a fistful of her mother's shirt, and she did not let go once in 11 hours. Cecily did not sleep at all. She lay on her side facing her daughter and counted her breathing the way she had counted it in 6 apartments across a year and a half, and at some point after 2 in the morning, she understood that she was going to be doing this for a very long time, and that it was going to be all right, and that these were 2 separate facts, and both of them were true. Down the corridor, Dante Corsaro sat in his study and did not turn a light on. I was not thinking about Wade Turnbull. Wade Turnbull had been taken out of that building in handcuffs and would spend the rest of his usable life explaining himself to people who did not care, and Dante had already put him down and would not pick him up again. He was thinking about a man's hand closing in the edge of a coat. You never asked because you never had to. He had employed Bruno Ferro for 11 years. In 11 years, he had learned the man's last name, the fact that he did not drink, and the fact that he could be relied upon in a way almost nobody could. That was the entire file. He did not know if Bruno had a sister. He did not know where the man had grown up or what he had done before the gate, or whether there was anyone in this city who was going to find out on the news. He got up at 4 in the morning and went and woke his own bookkeeper and made him open the personnel records, and he sat with a folder for 2 hours and read the file of a man he had spoken to every single day for over a decade. There was a mother, she was 78. She lived in Gentilly. Dante drove out there himself at 7 in the morning and knocked on the door and told her, standing on her front step with his hat in his hands like a man from another century, and she did not know who he was until he said his name, and then she did. She hit him. Once flat across the face with a 78-year-old hand, and Dante Corsaro stood there and let her and did not move his head, and when she started to cry, he stayed exactly where he was until she was ready to stop. He said he liked your gait, she said finally. 11 years, and that's what he told me. He said it was a good gait and nobody bothered him. Yes, ma'am. He didn't tell me what he did at it. He kept a little girl alive at it, Dante said. That's what he did at it. He paid for everything. He would have done that anyway. What he did that nobody expected, what 4 separate men in his organization commented on afterward, quietly was carry the casket himself at the front on the left and stand in that church with the whole East Bank watching and let them all see his face. Margot Renard did not come out of her room for 2 days. On the 3rd morning, Dante sent for her and she came and sat down across the desk from him with her hands folded in her lap and waited. He did not raise his voice. He never did. You pointed us at the dry dock, he said. Nobody else in this house could have done that. Turnbull would have finished what he was told to finish, and my men would have found that building tomorrow, and there would have been a body in it the size of a shoebox. He let that sit. That was the first true thing you've done in a month, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Margot's chin moved. But you put her in that building, Dante said. You sat on a stool for 4 evenings, and you handed a man the walls of my house, 1 brick at a time. And you told him about my wife, and you told him how old my daughter was when she died. And a man who stood at my gate for 11 years is in the ground this morning because of a conversation you had in a bar. I know. Do you? Yes, her voice was steady. That surprised both of them. I've known since the 2nd evening. I went back anyway. Dante looked at her for a while. Why, bye? And Margot Renard, who had spent 8 years being the most careful person in that house, told the truth out loud for the first time in her adult life. Because I waited, she said. 8 years. I drew the curtains on the 11th of June every single year, and you never knew I was doing it on purpose. I learned which stair creaked so I wouldn't wake you. I stood outside that door with a folded newspaper. In the mornings your eyes were red, and I never once knocked because I decided that was love and that it would be counted. Her hands were shaking in her lap. And then my sister walked in with a suitcase and a 5-year-old, and in 3 weeks that child got something out of you that I could not get in 8 years, and I sat at the end of a corridor and watched you cry over her, and she stopped. Say it, Dante said. I hated a 5-year-old, Margot said. That's what I am. I sat in the dark, and I asked myself whether everything would go back if she weren't here, and I did not say no. Neither of them said anything for a moment. I never gave you a reason, Dante said, in 8 years. No, not one look, not one word. No, sir. Then you'll understand, he said, that what you've done you didn't do for me. You did it in a room I was never in. He stood up. Be out by morning. Margot nodded and got up. And Margot, she stopped at the door. If you ever do one that puts either of them at risk again, I won't remember whose sister you are. I understand. Do you want to see her before you go? Margot's hand went to the doorframe. No, she said. I don't think I could look at her. Cecily came to her room at 11 that night. Margot had 1 suitcase open on the bed. It was the same suitcase she had walked in with 8 years earlier, and she had noticed that and had been unable to stop noticing it. The sisters looked at each other for a long moment. I'm not going to forgive you, Cecily said. I know. I want to. Cecily's voice cracked and she let it. I've been sitting downstairs for 3 hours trying to find the road to it, because you're the only family I have left in this world, and you let me in at 4 in the morning when you didn't have to, and I have not forgotten that. But every time I get close, I think about her on that crate with her ribbon gone, and I can't get past it. You shouldn't get past it. Don't do that. Cecily's hands closed. Don't be humble at me. That's the same thing you've done my whole life. You make yourself small, and everybody feels sorry for you, and nobody ever says the thing out loud. Margot stopped folding. Say it then. You've been angry at me since I was 4 years old, Cecily said. For things I didn't do. For the way people looked at me. I never asked for a single one of them, and I could not have stopped it if I tried, and you have made me pay for all of it for 24 years quietly in little pieces, and I let you because I thought that's what I owed you for being the easy one." Her voice dropped. "And I have never once in my life been the easy one, Margot. I married a man who broke my wrist, and I told the doctor I fell on the stairs." Margot's face came apart. "I know that," she said. "I know that. I saw your jaw when you came through that door, and I have thought about it every night since, and I still did it." Cecily nodded slowly. "Then that's what you have to carry," she said. "Not me, that." She stood in the doorway another second. "Josie asked where you went," she said. "She asked for you at breakfast." And that not Dante, not the dry dock, not the dismissal, was what finally took Margot Renard down onto the edge of that bed with both hands over her face. She walked out through the servant's door before dawn with the same small suitcase she had carried in. And somewhere between the gate and the bus stop at the end of the road, she understood the thing she had spent 8 years refusing to look at. Dante Corsaro had never been hers to lose. What she had lost entirely to her own inability to let her sister simply be loved. Wade Turnbull lasted 9 days before he started talking, and what finally opened him was not the kidnapping charge and not the attempted murder charge. It was arithmetic. He worked out sitting in a cell that Corbin Yates had put 2 men on a catwalk above him and given them instructions that did not include Wade Turnbull walking out of that building. He worked out that the ransom he had asked for had never been going to arrive, and that the car had never been going to be there, and that he had been handed a script by a man who had already decided what the last page of it was. He asked for a lawyer who was not the one who had been paid for him. Then he gave them Corbin Yates. He gave them the room above the garage on Ashland. He gave them the retainer. He gave them the sentence about the little girl, and swore correctly that he had not written it. He gave them dates, and he gave them a name for the man who had driven the gray sedan. And then, because he had been drinking in the same rooms for 11 years and had heard everything anybody in those rooms had ever said, he gave them one more thing. He told them that in the fall 5 years ago, Corbin Yates's crew had put 2 men in a truck out on the causeway in fog, and that the instructions had been to frighten a wife into telling her husband to be reasonable about the bonded warehouses, and that it had gone further than it was supposed to go. Dante's attorney called him at 4 in the afternoon. He listened to the whole thing standing at his own desk without saying a word, and when it was finished he said thank you and hung up and did not move for a very long time. 5 years. 5 years of lying awake at the same hour, asking the same question. If they had not belonged to me, would they still be alive? And building a room out of that question, and locking a door at the end of a corridor, and forbidding 2 names in his own house, and telling himself the reason he could never rest was that he did not know. He knew now. Yes, that was the answer. Yes, they would still be alive. They had died because a man wanted a warehouse and thought a frightened woman was the cheapest way to get it, and the men he sent had been careless in fog. Dante Corsaro sat down in his chair and put his hands flat on the desk and waited to feel something. What arrived was not what he expected. He had assumed for 5 years that the day he found out would be the day he became something, that there was a version of himself waiting on the other side of that information, and that it would be terrible, and that he had been holding the door on it with both hands. He sat there for 4 hours, and that man never showed up. Because Corbin Yates was 1 phone call away, 3 cars a room above a garage, and by midnight it would be finished. And Dante ran the numbers on it the way he ran numbers on everything, and the numbers came out ugly. Yates dead meant the Ashland crew took the wharves in retaliation or died trying. That meant 6 months of it. That meant men in cars outside his own gate, and the answer to the question of what a 5-year-old was doing in the middle of a war between 2 families. And the answer was that she was doing the same thing another 5-year-old had once been doing in a car on a causeway. He had already buried 1 little girl for the crime of belonging to him. He sat there until 3 in the morning, and then he made a phone call, and it was not the one his father would have made. In met the federal prosecutor in a parking structure at 6 on a Sunday morning, which was theatrical and which he was told afterward had been unnecessary. He came alone. He brought a box. The woman across from him had been trying to get inside the Corsaro family for 9 years and had never gotten within a mile of it, and she looked at the box on the hood of her car for a long moment before she said anything. "What is this?" "Manifests," Dante said. 22 years of them. Every bonded warehouse, every berth, every ship. Names of everyone who moved through my docks and what they paid for the privilege. He tapped the lid. The Ashland Street crew is in there 41 times. Corbin Yates is in there personally on 11. She looked up. And you? I'm in there on every page. That stopped her. Mr. Corsaro, she said it carefully. You understand what you're handing me. There isn't a version of this where you walk. I can't give you that. I don't have the authority to give you that, and I wouldn't if I did. I didn't ask you for anything. Everybody asked for something. Dante looked at her. He put 2 men in a truck on the causeway in the fog 5 years ago, he said. My wife was 34, my daughter was 5, and I have spent every one of those 5 years telling myself that when I found out who it was, I would take it out of the world with my own hands. And 2 weeks ago, a man stood in a warehouse and told a 5-year-old to hold still, Dante said. And I got her back, and she put her arms around my neck on a gravel drive in front of 40 people. He put both hands on the box. If I do this the way my father would have done it, there's a war on the East Bank by Friday, and she's inside it. If I do it this way, Yates is in a federal courtroom in 18 months, and I'm in the cell next to him, and she is nowhere near any of it. The prosecutor was quiet for a while. That's not how men like you think, she said. No, Dante agreed, it isn't. He signed everything she put in front of him over the following 9 weeks. He signed it knowing exactly what came off the table with each page, the wharves, the warehouses, the name that had made men careful for 2 generations, all of it going into a file with his own signature at the bottom. He never once asked what he would get. The house understood before anyone announced anything. Men stopped coming to the gate. The cars stopped arriving in the evenings. 2 of the lieutenants left the city, and one of them came to say goodbye and could not look at him. And Dante shook his hand anyway and said he'd have done the same and meant it. And Cecily Renard started packing. Dante found out because Josie found out. The child came down that corridor at 4 in the afternoon and stopped at his door, and for the first time in her life, she did not push it open. She knocked. 2 small knocks low down on the wood at exactly the height a 5-year-old can reach. Dante went and opened it. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her chin was doing the thing it did before it did the other thing, and she was holding her crayon tin against her chest with both hands, the way she had held it in that doorway the first time. Mama says we have to go, she said. Dante crouched down. She might be right. Are we going tonight? I don't know, sweetheart. Josie's mouth twisted, and she got it back under control, and she asked him the question she had walked down that entire corridor to ask. If we go, she said, will you be by yourself again? Dante Corsaro had been shot at twice in his life. He had been in a room with a man holding a knife and had not moved. He had identified his own wife's body in a hallway and walked out of it under his own power. He had to put his hand on the doorframe. Yes, he said, then I don't want to go. That's not your, I don't want to go. She was crying properly now, the ugly kind, the kind that came out of her all at once. Everybody keeps making me go places. I went out of our old house in the night, and I went to the loud man's warehouse, and now Mama's putting the shirts in the bag again, and nobody asked me. And Dante pulled her in and put his hand on the back of her head and let her cry into his shoulder, and did not tell her it would be all right, because he did not know that it would be. I went to Cecily that night. She had 2 bags on the bed and a third one open, and she stopped when he came in and stood there with her arms at her sides. I know, she said. You don't. I know that a man like you doesn't get to hand a box of paper to the federal government and then keep a house, Cecily said. I'm not a fool, sir. Half the staff is gone. Nobody's come to the gate in 10 days. Her voice wobbled. I know exactly what you did, and I know why you did it, and I cannot stay in a house that's about to have federal agents standing in the hallway when my daughter comes down for breakfast. That's fair. Don't say that's fair. She turned away. Say something else. Dante stood there. I'm not going to offer you money, he said. There's some and you'll have it, and that's not what this is. He said the next part badly, and he knew it, and he kept going anyway. 6 months ago, I could have offered you a wall, men at the gate, a card house nobody could get into. I don't have any of that anymore. It's gone. In 18 months, I'll be gone too for a while. My attorney says 4 years, maybe 5, and he's optimistic by profession. Cecily turned around. So this is what I have. Dante did not move toward her. I love you. I have loved you since the night it rained, and you told me about the diaper bag, and then told me not to be nice to you because you had nowhere to put it. And I love your daughter as though she came out of my own life, and I'm not going to pretend to you that I don't because I did that for 5 years about everything, and it nearly killed me. Cecily's hand came up over her mouth. But if you stay, he said, it has to be because you chose me, not because you need work, not because you need a wall. I don't have a wall. There is nothing left in this for you except a man who's going to lose everything he has and then go away for 4 years and ask you to be here when he gets back. The silence went on a long time. You waited until you had nothing, Cecily said to ask me. Yes. Why? Because when I had everything, Dante said, you couldn't have said no. Cecily stood in that room and looked at him. Then she crossed it and took the front of his shirt in both hands the way her daughter did and put her forehead against his chest and stayed there. 4 years, she said, maybe 5. I waited 4 for a man who took the money out of my baby's bag, Cecily said. I think I can do 4 for you. She stayed. Some weeks later, on a bright Sunday morning, Dante took a key out of a drawer he had not opened in 5 years. He walked down the west wing with Josie's hand in his, and she was very quiet because she had already worked out that this was a serious errand, and she took serious errands seriously. He put the key in the door at the end and stopped. I can't, he said. Josie looked up at him. Do you want me to do it? She asked. And Dante Corsaro laughed one broken sound and said yes. He lifted her up, and she turned the key with both hands and the door open. He carried her in and set her down. He showed her the photographs one at a time and told her the names out loud in that house for the first time in 5 years. Elena, Mira. He told her that Elena had played the piano badly and known it and played it anyway, and that Mira had hidden his cufflinks in his coat pockets and denied it to his face with her hands behind her back every single time for 2 years. He got about that far. Josie did not understand the shape of what he was telling her. She was 5. She understood exactly one thing, which was that the man holding her hand had gone quiet in a way that meant something was wrong with him. She put her crayon tin down on the floor. Then she put both arms as far around him as they would go, which was not far, and held on. And Dante Corsaro went down onto the floor of his daughter's bedroom and wept openly without covering his face for the first time in 5 years, and did not try to stop and did not send the child out of the room. Josie patted his back the way you pat a dog you are not entirely sure about. Is it because they're not here? She asked. Yes. But you can still like them. Yes, Dante said. I can still like them. And me too. He got hold of her and held on. And you too, he said. And that was the thing he finally understood. Sitting on the floor of a room he had sealed for 5 years with a 5-year-old's arms around his neck, that he had spent all of it believing his heart was a single seat, and that letting anyone sit in it meant somebody had to get up. Josie had not replaced anyone. Nobody was ever going to replace anyone. His heart, it turned out, had simply been bigger the whole time than the room he had locked it in. A season later, a new man at the door started forward to stop a small figure in a red lace dress who came flying down the corridor and shoved the study door open without knocking. An older man caught him by the elbow. Don't. She can't just... She can. Through the gap in the door, the two of them looked in. Josie Renard had climbed into Dante Corsaro's lap and was with enormous seriousness arranging a paper crown on the head of a man 3 states used to be careful about. She had made it herself. It was crooked, and it had too much tape on it, and there was a red drawing on the front of it that was either a lion or a house. On the wall behind them hung a picture of 3 people holding hands in front of a house with too many windows. And beside it, in a plain frame, a photograph of 2 more. The new man opened his mouth. The older one shook his head and pulled the door quietly shut. That one, he said, is not just anyone. Dante Corsaro had spent 5 years believing that love was a weapon he handed his enemies, and it took a 5-year-old with a red crayon to prove to him that it was the only thing they were never able to take.